The food hit her face before she could duck. Chunks of expensive catering-grade chicken and vegetables sliding down her cheek while his sister's laughter echoed across the formal dining room. He sat 3 feet away, fork still in hand, watching his pregnant wife endure the assault his sister found amusing, though he made no move to intervene or defend her. His family had orchestrated this dinner deliberately, she realized too late, designed to humiliate her one final time before suggesting he reconsider the marriage while he still had options. They'd questioned her background, mocked her appearance, and implied she'd gotten pregnant deliberately, building to this moment when his sister would physically demonstrate exactly how little they valued her. The morning's argument played on a loop in her mind. She'd asked him for $20, literally $20, to purchase the prenatal vitamins her doctor had prescribed for the baby's neural development. Yet he'd refused and accused her of always asking for money. He'd suggested she get a job, conveniently forgetting he'd insisted she quit working once they married, because he wanted a wife who focused on the home. His mother cleared her throat pointedly, indicating she should leave the table to clean up, adding that women who can't handle family dynamics wouldn't survive in their social circle. She remained seated, food still dripping onto her lap, phone now visible in her hand as she opened her contacts and found the name she'd avoided using for 2 years. Her father had made her promise to call if she ever needed him, no matter the situation. Though she'd been determined to build a life independent of his wealth and influence, that independence had cost her dignity, safety, and apparently her husband's basic respect. But it was about to buy her something far more valuable: justice. Across the city, her father was finishing his evening review of the bank's major accounts, including the portfolio that held this family's construction company, rental properties, and trust funds, all coincidentally up for their annual risk assessment. One phone call would begin the process. One conversation would freeze everything. One daughter's tears would cost this family everything they'd built. But the question that would haunt this evening wasn't whether she'd make that call. It was whether the family currently smirking at her humiliation would understand what they'd done wrong, even as they found themselves on the floor, begging for mercy they'd never shown her. And would the man who denied her vitamins for their child finally realize that the woman he'd diminished owned the very foundation his family stood upon? Dear viewers, this powerful story will teach you about standing up against family abuse, the critical importance of prenatal care, and why you should never judge people by their financial appearance. You'll learn how to recognize emotional manipulation, when to show mercy versus demanding accountability, and why defending your spouse matters more than pleasing toxic family members. After watching, drop in the comments what lessons resonated with you most and what you would have done differently if you were Elena facing this humiliation. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating, educational stories that deliver real-life wisdom and entertainment. Your support means everything. The chandelier above the dining table cost more than most people's cars, though Elena had stopped noticing such things after 6 months of marriage to Derek Harrison. She'd noticed other things instead: the way his mother, Patricia, examined her clothing with the precision of a jeweler detecting flaws, the way his father, Robert, spoke past her rather than to her, the way his sister, Vanessa, smiled with her mouth while her eyes calculated cruelty. Tonight's family dinner had been presented as an olive branch, a chance for them to start fresh. Though the thorns became apparent the moment Elena arrived, wearing a dress from Target rather than the boutiques Patricia preferred. "How quaint," Patricia had murmured, her fingers brushing the fabric of Elena's sleeve with the same expression someone might use when encountering a peculiar insect. "Derek, darling, doesn't your firm offer some sort of clothing allowance for employees' wives?" Derek had laughed, actually laughed, before explaining that Elena preferred to be economical in a tone that made frugality sound like a character defect. Elena's hand had moved instinctively to her stomach, to the small bump that was just beginning to show at 4 months, the same pregnancy that had changed everything between them. He'd been different before, attentive, warm, genuinely interested in her thoughts. But the positive pregnancy test had transformed him into someone who echoed his family's values rather than challenging them. The first course arrived with Patricia's commentary about proper nutrition during pregnancy, delivered while she pushed her own food around her plate without eating. Robert had transitioned smoothly into questions about Elena's family, questions designed to confirm what they'd already decided, that she came from nowhere, knew nobody, and brought nothing to the marriage except the baby they clearly considered a strategic maneuver rather than a blessing. "Your father," Robert had said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin that probably cost more than Elena's entire outfit. "What does he do again? You've been remarkably vague about your family background." Elena had rehearsed this answer 1,000 times, the careful truth that revealed nothing. "He works in finance, banking specifically." Every word accurate, though the scale was something she'd hidden deliberately, desperate to find someone who loved Elena Chen, the person rather than Elena Chen, whose father's signature could move markets. "Banking," Vanessa had repeated, her voice dripping with amusement. "How wonderfully generic. Let me guess, he's a teller?" "No, wait, a loan officer at some strip mall branch?" The mockery had continued through the second course, building like a symphony towards some crescendo Elena couldn't yet identify. Derek had participated with his silence, his refusal to defend her speaking louder than words. She'd caught him glancing at his parents, seeking their approval with the desperation of a child afraid of disappointing authority, and she'd realized with crushing clarity that she'd married a man who'd never fully separated from his family's judgment. The morning's argument resurfaced in her mind with perfect, painful detail. She'd asked him for $20. The prenatal vitamins at the pharmacy cost $18.99, she'd explained, and her doctor had been emphatic about their importance for preventing neural tube defects. Derek had been getting ready for work, checking his reflection in the mirror while wearing a watch that cost more than some people's monthly rent, when he turned to her with genuine irritation. "Elena, we talked about this. You need to be more financially responsible. I can't just hand you money every time you decide you need something." "It's not something I decided," she'd protested, hating the pleading tone in her voice. "Dr. Morrison prescribed them. They're for the baby's brain development." "Then ask your family to help," he'd said, gathering his briefcase and his keys. "I wanted a wife who could manage a household budget, not someone who constantly needs handouts." The cruelty had been stunning, particularly since he'd insisted she quit her job as a graphic designer 3 months after their wedding. "I want a wife who focuses on our home," he'd said then, making it sound romantic rather than controlling. "Without income, without access to their joint account beyond the minimal household allowance he provided." She'd been exactly where he apparently wanted her, dependent, diminished, and desperate. Now, sitting at his family's dinner table with food dripping down her face, Elena understood that the morning's refusal hadn't been about $20 at all. It had been about power, about keeping her small, about ensuring she remembered her place in the hierarchy they'd constructed. Vanessa's laughter continued, joined now by Patricia's delicate chuckle, while Robert sipped his wine as if assault by leftovers was simply dinner theater he'd paid to witness. Derek met her eyes finally, and what she saw there broke something fundamental inside her. Not guilt, not anger at his sister, but embarrassment. Embarrassment at her reaction, at her inability to handle his family's sense of humor, at her failure to be the kind of wife who could laugh off humiliation while pregnant with his child. The phone in her lap suddenly felt heavy with possibility, with the weight of a decision she'd sworn never to make. Her father's contact information glowed on the screen. "Dad, do not use unless emergency." 2 years ago, when she told him she wanted to marry Derek without revealing her background, her father had been skeptical but supportive. "The day you need me," he'd said, his eyes serious behind his reading glasses, "you call, no matter what time, no matter what situation. Promise me, Elena." She'd promised, never imagining the emergency would look like this. Elena's thumb hovered over the call button for exactly 3 seconds before Vanessa's voice cut through the dining room again, sharp and delighted with its own cruelty. "Oh God, she's just going to sit there? Derek, your wife is literally covered in food, and she's playing with her phone instead of cleaning herself up. Is this the kind of mother our nephew is going to have? Someone who can't even handle basic hygiene?" The word nephew landed like another assault, the possessive entitlement of it, the assumption that this baby belonged more to Derek's family than to Elena herself. Patricia nodded in agreement, her expression a masterclass in refined disgust, while Robert checked his own phone, as if bored by the entire spectacle. Derek opened his mouth, and for one fragile moment, Elena thought he might actually defend her. Might finally choose his wife and unborn child over his family's approval. "Elena," he said quietly, his tone the one he'd use with a misbehaving child, "maybe you should go freshen up. You're making everyone uncomfortable." She was making them uncomfortable. Not Vanessa, who'd thrown food at a pregnant woman. Not Patricia, who'd orchestrated an evening of systematic humiliation. Not Robert, who'd spent dinner implying her family was trash. Her for having the audacity to sit at their table with gravy in her hair and tears threatening to fall. The decision crystallized in that instant, sharp and clear as broken glass. Elena pressed the call button, lifted the phone to her ear, and watched Derek's expression shift from embarrassment to confusion. The phone rang once, twice, and then her father's voice filled her ear. Warm with immediate concern because he recognized her number, even though she'd never called it before. "Elena? What's wrong?" 3 words, and she heard everything she'd been missing in her marriage. Immediate prioritization of her well-being. No questions about whether she was being dramatic. No suggestions that she was overreacting. Just instant, unconditional concern. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her, "I need you to freeze some accounts for me." Across the table, Derek's confusion deepened, though he tried to maintain his composure in front of his family. "Elena, who are you calling? What are you talking about?" Her father's voice sharpened with focus. "Whose accounts, sweetheart? Give me names." "Robert Harrison, Patricia Harrison, Derek Harrison, Vanessa Harrison." She recited them clearly, watching understanding begin to dawn on Derek's face even as his family continued their conversation, oblivious. Harrison Construction Group, Harrison Property Management, the Family Trust, everything. "Consider it done," her father said immediately. "The annual review is already queued. I can flag them all for enhanced scrutiny and compliance verification. They'll be frozen within the hour pending investigation. But Elena, talk to me. What happened?" Robert's phone buzzed, then Patricia's, then Vanessa's, then Derek's. All within 30 seconds of each other, a synchronized notification that their world was about to end, though they didn't know it yet. They glanced at their screens with the casual entitlement of people who'd never experienced genuine consequences. Then their expressions changed as they read identical messages from Harrison Family Bank, the institution that held every account, every line of credit, every asset their empire was built upon. "Dad," Elena said, watching the color drain from Derek's face as he finally understood, "I'll explain everything. But right now I need you to know that your grandson almost didn't get the vitamins he needs because his father told me this morning that $20 was too much to spend on prenatal care." The silence that followed that statement was profound. Her father had 6 grandchildren from Elena's 3 older siblings, and he'd bought them everything from college educations to their first cars. But he'd never had a son-in-law stupid enough to deny his own child basic medical necessities. $20, her father repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "He denied you $20. While wearing a $15,000 watch," Elena added, her eyes locked on Derek's face as understanding and horror battled for dominance. "And his sister just threw food at me during dinner. At my face, Dad, while I'm pregnant." While they all watched, "Jesus Christ, Elena." Her father's anger was palpable even through the phone. "The accounts are frozen, all of them. And sweetheart, I'm adding a full audit. If there's anything questionable in their finances, and there's always something questionable, I'll find it." Robert stood abruptly, his phone gripped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "There must be some mistake. The bank is saying our accounts are frozen pending investigation. All of them. This is impossible. We have quarterly reviews. We have compliance clearances. We have a relationship with the bank president," Elena finished for him, setting her phone down on the table, screen up so they could all see her father's name and his official title glowing in the contact information. "Richard Chen, President and CEO of Harrison Family Bank, also known as my father, also known as the man whose daughter you've spent 6 months treating like garbage. Patricia's wine glass slipped from her fingers, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed silently, the laugher finally, mercifully gone. Derek pushed his chair back from the table, standing as if to physically distance himself from the catastrophe unfolding, though there was nowhere far enough to run. "Elena," he started, his voice cracking on her name, "you never said. You told me your father worked in banking. You never mentioned—" "I told you exactly what you needed to know," she interrupted, standing slowly and feeling the baby shift inside her, a small movement that reminded her why this mattered. "I wanted someone who'd love me for myself, not for my last name or my father's money." "Congratulations, Derek. You passed that test. You loved me for exactly 6 months, right up until the moment loving me became inconvenient for your family." "This is insane," Vanessa managed, her voice thin and desperate. "You can't just freeze people's accounts because your feelings got hurt. That's not how banks work. That's not legal." "Actually," Elena said, gathering her purse and her dignity, "when accounts are flagged for annual compliance review and enhanced scrutiny, the bank has not only the right, but the obligation to freeze assets pending verification. It's completely legal. It's also completely standard procedure when someone with authority, say, the president's daughter, raises concerns about account holder conduct that might indicate character issues relevant to lending risk." She walked toward the door, past the table where this family had tried to break her, past the chandelier that cost more than most cars, past the life she'd tried to build with a man who'd chosen his family's cruelty over her humanity. "Elena, wait," Derek called, following her into the foyer. "We can fix this. I'll talk to them. I'll make this right. Just please, call your father back. Tell him to unfreeze the accounts." She turned, one hand on the door, one hand on her stomach. "You had the chance to make things right this morning when I asked for $20 for vitamins. You had another chance tonight when your sister threw food at your pregnant wife. You've had 6 months of chances, Derek. This is what happens when you run out." The door closed behind her with a soft, final click, and through the heavy wood she could hear the beginning of what would become hours of desperate phone calls, frantic explanations, and eventually, inevitably, the sound of people who'd never begged for anything, learning what it felt like to plead for mercy from someone who had every reason to deny it. The calls started before Elena reached her car, before she'd even processed the weight of what she'd done, before the adrenaline could fade enough to let the shaking begin. Her phone lit up with Derek's number once, twice, 7 times in the span of 3 minutes, each call going to voicemail because she'd turned off the ringer the moment she'd stepped outside. She sat in her modest Honda Civic, the car Derek had mockingly called her adorable little sedan, while he drove a BMW his parents had gifted him, and watched the notifications pile up like digital desperation. "Derek, 8:47 p.m. Please answer, we need to talk." Derek, 8:48 p.m. "Elena, this is serious. My father's business accounts are frozen. Payroll is due Friday." Derek, 8:49 p.m. "You're being unreasonable. Whatever happened tonight we can discuss like adults." Derek, 8:51 p.m. "My mother is having a panic attack. Are you happy now?" The progression was almost predictable, starting with demands disguised as requests, escalating to blame, landing finally on guilt. She'd seen this pattern before in smaller conflicts, the way he'd twist situations until somehow his failures became her overreactions, his cruelty became her sensitivity, his family's abuse became her inability to take a joke. But tonight the dynamic had shifted irreversibly, and no amount of manipulation could freeze accounts that were already frozen. Her father called at 8:53 p.m., his voice concerned but respectful of her boundaries. "Elena, sweetheart, I have 6 different lawyers calling me right now claiming to represent the Harrison family. Do you want me to take their calls, or should I let them keep panicking for a while?" Despite everything, Elena felt a smile tug at her lips. "Let them panic. They've earned it." "They've earned a lot more than panic," her father said grimly. "The preliminary audit is already showing some interesting discrepancies. Nothing criminal yet, but your father-in-law has been listing personal expenses as business deductions. His construction company has been underpaying contractors and then tying them up in arbitration when they complain. Your sister-in-law has 3 different credit cards maxed out, all guaranteed by the family trust. And your husband, he paused, his disgust palpable even through the phone. Your husband has been withdrawing cash from your joint account. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger alerts, but consistent. 200 here, 300 there. Over the past 6 months, it adds up to about $15,000 you probably didn't know was missing. Elena's hand tightened on the steering wheel, the number hitting her like a physical blow. $15,000? While he'd refused her 20 for vitamins. While he'd lectured her about financial responsibility. While he'd suggested she was the one who couldn't manage money. Where did it go? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer would hurt. Restaurants, high-end bars, hotels. Her father's voice was gentle but honest. I'm sorry, sweetheart. The credit card receipts attached to those withdrawals show charges for 2 people, and the timing suggests... He's been cheating, Elena finished, the words surprisingly steady despite the betrayal blooming fresh and sharp in her chest. Of course he has. Why else would he be so eager for his family to convince me to leave? The pieces assembled themselves with cruel clarity. The sudden coldness after the pregnancy announcement, the increasing criticism, the way he joined his family's campaign to make her feel worthless. He hadn't just been choosing his family over her. He'd been looking for an exit strategy, a way to end the marriage that wouldn't make him the villain. If they could break her down enough, make her desperate enough, maybe she'd be the one to leave. Maybe he could play the victim, the good man whose wife abandoned him and their unborn child. Do you want me to destroy him? Her father asked, and Elena knew he meant it literally. Richard Chen hadn't built a banking empire by being soft. Because I can. One phone call and I can make sure Derek Harrison never gets approved for so much as a gas station credit card. His family's construction business depends on lines of credit that I personally oversee. I can make them all disappear, Elena. Completely. Say the word. The temptation was powerful, seductive even. She imagined Derek's face when he realized the full extent of what he'd lost. Not just her, but his entire financial future. She imagined Vanessa unable to buy the designer clothes she wore like armor. She imagined Patricia and Robert watching their real estate empire crumble because no bank would touch them after Richard Chen blacklisted their names. But then the baby moved again, a gentle flutter that reminded her she wasn't making decisions just for herself anymore. Not yet, she said finally. Right now, I just want them to understand what they've done. I want them to spend tonight making phone calls that go nowhere. I want them to feel powerless and desperate and small. Tomorrow we can talk about permanent consequences. That's my girl, her father said with approval. Strategic and merciful. Though between you and me, mercy might be wasted on people who throw food at pregnant women. Probably, Elena agreed, watching another call from Derek light up her screen. But I want to see them beg first. I want to watch them realize that the woman they treated like trash has been holding all the cards since the beginning. I want them on their knees before I decide whether to help them back up. Her phone buzzed with a video call request, Derek's contact photo filling the screen. The picture from their wedding day when he'd still looked at her like she mattered. She answered it, curious despite herself, and found herself looking at a scene of complete chaos. Derek's face filled the frame, but behind him she could see Patricia pacing frantically, Robert on one phone while gesturing wildly with his other hand, and Vanessa crying, actually crying, mascara running down her face in dark streams. Elena, please, Derek said, and there was the begging she'd predicted, right on schedule. Please, just tell your father this was a misunderstanding. My dad's lawyers say the accounts could be frozen for weeks during an investigation. We have employees who won't get paid. We have contracts that will default. You have a wife you denied $20 for prenatal vitamins? Elena interrupted, her voice calm and clear. You have a sister who assaulted me at dinner. You have parents who spent 6 months trying to convince you I wasn't good enough for your family. What you don't have is the right to ask me for mercy you never showed. I'll make it right, Derek promised, desperation bleeding through every word. Whatever you want. Family counseling, marriage therapy. I'll cut my family off completely if that's what you need. Just please, Elena, please fix this. Behind him, Patricia stopped pacing, her face twisted with the effort of maintaining composure. Derek, don't beg her. We have rights. We have lawyers. She can't just... Yes, she can, Mother, Derek snapped, the first time Elena had ever heard him contradict Patricia directly. She absolutely can, because apparently my wife is Richard Chen's daughter, and we've been treating her like she's nobody for 6 months. So yes, I'm begging. I'm begging my wife not to destroy my entire family because we were too stupid and too cruel to see what we had. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that Derek was finally seeing clearly. Finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd lost, what he'd risked, what he'd thrown away for his family's approval, and whatever cheap affair he'd been funding with money stolen from their joint account. I'll call you tomorrow, she said quietly. After you've had time to think about what kind of man refuses his pregnant wife money for vitamins, but spends $15,000 on hotels and restaurants with someone else. After your family has had time to think about whether throwing food at people is really the kind of behavior that deserves mercy. After you've all had a chance to really, truly understand what you've done. She ended the call before he could respond, before she could see the impact of mentioning the $15,000, before the begging could continue. Her phone immediately lit up again. Derek, Vanessa, even Patricia's number appearing for the first time ever. But Elena silenced them all and started her car. The drive to her father's house took 20 minutes through quiet streets, and with every mile she felt the weight of the evening settling onto her shoulders. She'd used the nuclear option. She'd deployed the weapon she'd promised herself she'd never touch. She'd become exactly what she'd feared, the rich girl who solved problems with her father's money and power. But then she remembered Vanessa's laughter as food dripped down her face. Remembered Derek's embarrassment at her reaction rather than his sister's action. Remembered Patricia's suggestion that she clean up in the servants' bathroom. Remembered 6 months of systematic degradation designed to make her feel worthless. And she thought, maybe some people need to learn that actions have consequences. Maybe some cruelty deserves to be met with justice rather than endless forgiveness. Maybe mercy is something you earn, not something you can demand while still laughing at the person you've hurt. Elena woke in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of a simpler time when her biggest concern had been algebra homework rather than whether to financially destroy her husband's family. Her father had insisted she stay the night, had prepared her old room himself with fresh sheets and the lavender pillow spray she'd loved as a teenager. Small gestures of care that highlighted everything missing from her marriage. Sunlight filtered through familiar curtains, and for a moment she could pretend the previous night had been a nightmare rather than a necessary reckoning. Her phone showed 43 missed calls, 17 voicemails, and 62 text messages. She scrolled through them while her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the baby's morning movements. The small flutters that reminded her every decision now affected 2 lives instead of 1. Vanessa, 11:34 p.m. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Please call me. Patricia, 12:07 a.m. Elena, we need to discuss this situation as adults. I'm certain we can reach an understanding. Robert, 1:23 a.m. Miss Chen, this is a business matter that should be handled through proper channels. Your father will be hearing from our attorneys. Derek, 2:41 a.m. I love you. I know I haven't shown it, but I do. Please come home so we can talk. Derek, 3:15 a.m. The hotel receipts aren't what you think. I can explain everything. Derek, 4:02 a.m. I'm sitting in our bedroom looking at the ultrasound pictures. I've been a terrible husband, and I'm going to be a terrible father if you don't give me the chance to fix this. The progression painted a portrait of a family's complete unraveling, each message revealing another layer of desperation and denial. Robert still thought lawyers could solve this. Patricia believed understanding meant Elena accepting their behavior. Vanessa had discovered consequences for the first time in her privileged life. And Derek was finally confronting what he'd become. Though whether his remorse was genuine or simply fear of losing everything remained unclear. Her father knocked softly before entering, carrying a breakfast tray with decaf coffee, whole grain toast, and the fruit smoothie he'd learned to make when her mother was pregnant with Elena's youngest brother. Good morning, sweetheart. How's my grandson? Active, Elena said, accepting the smoothie gratefully. And how do you know it's a boy? I haven't even found out yet. Father's intuition? he said with a smile that faded as he sat on the edge of her bed, his expression turning serious. We need to talk about what happens next. The Harrisons have already retained 3 different law firms, all of whom called me before 7 a.m. They're threatening everything from lawsuits to regulatory complaints to media exposure. Robert Harrison apparently believes that threatening the bank president's daughter is a sound legal strategy. Elena sipped her smoothie, considering her options with the same careful analysis her father had taught her when she joined him at the bank during summer internships, back before she decided to study graphic design instead of finance. What did you tell them? That I'd speak with my daughter and respond appropriately, her father said. But Elena, I need you to understand something. If we move forward with the full audit, and there's enough irregularities to justify it, Robert Harrison will likely face criminal charges for tax fraud. The construction company will fold. Derek's trust fund is already frozen, and if the investigation reveals the money was built on illegal activity, he could lose everything including his ability to practice law. Vanessa's credit cards are backed by the family trust, which means she'll default on about $200,000 in luxury purchases. And Patricia, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Patricia has been using the family foundation to pay for personal expenses. That's a felony. The scope of their corruption was almost impressive. A family so convinced of their own superiority that they'd built an empire on shortcuts and stolen money, never imagining anyone would look closely enough to notice. Elena thought about the baby growing inside her, about the family name this child would carry, about whether having Derek's last name would become a liability rather than an asset. What would you do? She asked her father, trusting his judgment in a way she'd never been able to trust Derek's. Honestly, I'd destroy them, he said bluntly. They threw food at my pregnant daughter. They denied my grandson basic medical care. They've been systematically cruel to you for months, and the preliminary evidence suggests they're criminals who've been hiding behind charitable donations and country club memberships. But Elena, I'm a father who spent 30 years protecting his children. I'm not objective about this. The question isn't what I would do. It's what you need in order to move forward with your life. A text from Derek interrupted. I'm outside your father's house. I've been here since 5 a.m. Please, just 5 minutes. Face to face. Elena walked to the window and looked down at the circular driveway where Derek's BMW sat parked crookedly, as if he'd arrived in such a rush he couldn't manage straight lines. He stood beside it, still wearing last night's dinner clothes, his hair uncombed and his face shadowed with stubble and exhaustion. As she watched, he looked up at the house, not at her window specifically, but searching, and she saw something in his expression that looked almost like genuine devastation. I'll talk to him, she said quietly, but not alone. Will you come with me? Her father stood, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Always. They met Derek in the formal living room, the space where Elena had celebrated birthdays and graduations, where her father had taught her to play chess on rainy afternoons. Derek looked worse up close, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate, his usual polished confidence replaced by raw fear. He started to speak, but Elena raised her hand, stopping him. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. And you're going to listen without interrupting. Can you do that? Derek nodded, then apparently remembering her request for silence, nodded again more emphatically. The accounts will stay frozen for 72 hours, Elena continued. During that time, you and your family will think very carefully about how you've treated people you considered beneath you. Your father will pay every contractor he's cheated with interest. Your mother will repay the foundation for every personal expense she's charged to it. Vanessa will get a job, a real job, not some board position your father created, and start paying down her credit cards herself. And you, Derek, will go to counseling. Not couples counseling, individual therapy to figure out why you became the kind of man who steals from his pregnant wife while denying her money for vitamins. I'll do it, Derek said immediately. All of it. Whatever you want. I'm not finished, Elena said firmly. After 72 hours, if your family has completed these requirements, my father will unfreeze the personal accounts. The business accounts will remain frozen pending a full audit because criminal activity doesn't get rewarded with mercy. If the audit reveals what we suspect, your father will face charges. But your mother, you and Vanessa will have the chance to distance yourselves from his crimes and rebuild your lives honestly. And us? Derek asked, his voice breaking on the question. Our marriage? Our baby? Elena placed her hand on her stomach, feeling her son move beneath her palm. That depends entirely on who you choose to become over the next 72 hours. The man I married wouldn't have let his sister assault me. The father my son deserves wouldn't steal money meant for his family. If you can find that person again, or maybe become him for the first time, then maybe we can talk about whether there's something worth saving. But Derek, I need you to understand something clearly. I don't need you. I don't need your family's name or their money or their approval. What I need is a partner who'll stand beside me when things get difficult, who'll defend me even against his own family, who'll prioritize our child's well-being over maintaining his parents' delusions. I can be that person, Derek said, tears now streaming openly down his face. Elena, I swear to God, I can be better than what I've shown you. Then prove it, she said simply. You have 72 hours. Derek looked at her father, then back at Elena, understanding dawning in his exhausted eyes that this wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum born from months of accumulated hurt and a night of inexcusable cruelty. He nodded slowly, accepting the terms because he had no other choice. Because for perhaps the first time in his life, he'd encountered someone who wouldn't be manipulated or diminished or convinced to settle for less than basic human dignity. Thank you, he whispered, for not destroying us completely, for giving us a chance we probably don't deserve. I'm not doing it for you, Elena said honestly. I'm doing it because I want my son to have the chance to know his father and grandparents, even if that chance comes with conditions. But Derek, if any of you waste this opportunity, if I hear about one more cruel comment or one more unpaid contractor or one more lie about where money went, I won't hesitate next time. My father taught me that mercy without accountability is just enabling bad behavior. This is the accountability. What you do with it determines whether there's any mercy left. After Derek left, driving away with slightly steadier hands than he'd arrived with, Elena sat with her father in the quiet living room and felt the weight of the decision settling into place. She'd chosen justice tempered with mercy, consequences balanced with opportunity, power wielded not for revenge, but for change. Whether the Harrison family would rise to meet her conditions or collapse under the weight of their own corruption remained to be seen. But for the first time in months, Elena felt like herself again. Not the diminished version Derek's family had tried to create, not the desperate woman begging for vitamin money, but the strong, principled daughter of Richard Chen, who understood that true power wasn't about destroying people who hurt you. It was about giving them exactly one chance to become better and having the strength to walk away if they wasted it. Her father put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into the embrace she'd been missing, the unconditional support that made her realize how much she'd been starving for basic kindness. Proud of you, sweetheart, he said quietly. That was harder than destroying them would have been. I know, Elena said, but I want my son to learn that we don't become cruel just because others were cruel to us first. We become better. We demand better. And if people can't meet that standard, she paused, thinking of Derek's desperate face, Vanessa's tears, Patricia's crumbling composure. Then we let them go and build something better without them. 3 days later, Derek would call to report that every contractor had been paid, that his mother had written a check to the foundation, that Vanessa had applied to 37 jobs, and that he'd attended his first therapy session. 3 months later, after consistent effort and genuine change, Elena would cautiously agree to couples counseling. And 7 months later, when their son was born healthy and perfect, with strong bones built from prenatal vitamins Derek had insisted on buying personally, they would begin the slow, difficult work of rebuilding a marriage on a foundation of honesty rather than hierarchy. But in that moment, sitting in her father's house with morning sunlight warming her face and her baby moving beneath her hand, Elena simply felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd stood up for herself when it mattered most. She'd used her power not to destroy, but to demand dignity, not to punish, but to teach, not to end a family, but to give them the chance to become people worth knowing. And sometimes, she thought, that was the strongest thing you could do, hold people accountable while still holding space for them to change.